Talk to him. Mr. Mike Retzer joins us. Mike, how you doing this morning?
I'm great, Dave. How are you?
Not bad, all things considered. And I'm just going to start with, I think, the big question, because you have a lot of knowledge in this area. And I want to ask you, as a mostly layman sitting here watching this, what was the extraction from Afghanistan as horribly bungled as it looks like it was, in your opinion?
Well, no question about it. And, yeah, as much as the military plans, I don't think they planned for the collapse as quickly as it happened. But it's a repeat, certainly a repeat of what happened 45 years ago in Vietnam. When the end comes, it comes very quickly. And the situation in Afghanistan is tragic. The people there evidently are unwilling to stand up and fight for a reasonable government. And the people who are willing to fight, the Taliban, well, they're in possession of.
No, exactly. And it's one of those things that I think it was probably a foregone conclusion to everyone who pays attention and studies this, that the Taliban would eventually worm their way back into power. But it wasn't a worming. They just walked right in the door, and the resistance fighters that we trained for all these years held the door open for them and said, come on in, guys. And I think that's what may have surprised a lot of people and a lot of officials.
Absolutely. But, you've got to study history and sometimes fiction. James Michener, 50 years ago, wrote a book called Caravan. And it's a great piece of fiction. But it's really not. He talked about the Russian invasion and occupation of Afghanistan and how that ended badly. And he predicted that 10, 15 years before it actually happened. And it was a tale for us to pay serious attention to. 9/11 came along, and of course, some of our enemies were in Afghanistan and in Iraq and whatnot. And we had to go after them. But to stay there 20 years was just the wrong policy.
Well, and that's one thing I think everybody on all sides agrees on, is that, yes, we did need to get out. And the Biden administration and President Biden himself yesterday in his speech seemed to be equating any criticism of the way the withdrawal happened with a desire to stay there. And you can say and you can believe and feel that the troops needed to come home from Afghanistan, and also believe that the way that we handled the withdrawal was unacceptable. And I think that they're trying to spin this as hard as they can, it looks like to me.
I think you're right. But that's what politics and politicians do. So we can't be surprised too much at that.
Not really. A poll is out. 70% of Americans disapprove of how the Biden administration handled the Afghanistan withdrawal. I don't know what's more surprising to me, that it was that quick of a result, or that there are apparently still 30% of the people that think, yeah, that went great. That's a bit surprising to me.
Partisan loyalists.
Well, and you're right, and that's part of our problem. And Mike, this is not going to get better anytime soon in terms of the partisan politics, is it?
Well, it's not. And, we'd like everybody to get along everywhere. Our moms all teach us to play nicely with our friends. But if we go back to the beginning of the Republic, we found yellow journalism, attack politics have always been a little bit part of our political system. So we shouldn't be too surprised that it continues.
Now, let me ask you this, in your opinion, with everything going on in Afghanistan, and we're focusing on the human rights problems that are about to blossom over there. We all know what's going to happen. But I'm starting to see a little bit of attention to this, but I don't know that it's gotten enough attention yet, and that's the veterans that served in Afghanistan over the last 20 years who are now sitting here watching the way this is unfolding. What can we say to them to make them feel any small amount better?
That's a good question. And the answer is, thank you for your service, and those who lost limbs and lives. Thank you. These are the people that stand out front when we need them and do such an incredibly great job. nothing more you can say. I mean, it was a mistake. It was made by our political leaders, and we are terribly sorry for the price you paid to protect what we thought was our freedoms. But, the other side of this is a long way away from America's shores, and it's much more a European problem than it is an American problem. And they kind of sat on their hands for the last 10, 15 years, and now they've got a problem at their back door, and they'll have to address it.
Now, as a former ambassador, you know how this works very well. One of the big outcomes of this, I think, is going to be the way America is viewed by some of those countries in Europe and elsewhere, Russia and everyone else. What kind of impact does this have on our standing around the world?
Great question again. But, we can't always, we've oftentimes been obsessed about how the rest of the world views us. And what the bigger or more important question is how we view ourselves. Are we happy with what we're doing and how we're doing it? We can't be loved and respected by everybody in the world, and we probably won't be. But we should be loved and appreciated at home by what we're doing. And getting out of there is the right thing to do. And minding our own business and taking care of our issues at home should be our agenda right now. Our economy is beginning to grow. We've still got the pandemic. There's lots of things for our political leaders to do. We need to get about doing them.
And that, I think, would be viewed as a welcome change by some people because it doesn't really feel like we've been doing what we need to do for a little while now, I think. And that, again, can't help us when we're dealing with other countries. And you're right, we need to view ourselves the appropriate way and take care of the business at home first. But we still have to deal with those other countries. And this has to be a factor that plays into discussions and negotiations and dealings with other countries, I would think.
It does. But, President Trump, he addressed the Europeans very straightforwardly. You've got to pay your fair share of NATO. You've got to take, they can sit on the back of their chairs and lean back and go tisk at America. But the fact is that Europe has to step up, and they have a responsibility in the world and the nature of things. And they need to get on and do their part of the solution as well. Europe is very wealthy, and certainly they can afford to take care of their own defense, and they should get on about that.
Well, and that has been an ongoing problem for a long, long time, though, Mike. They tend to sit there and wait for America to come rushing to the rescue, or in this particular case, just come rushing, and they sit back and do nothing. And then if something else happens, instead of taking initiative, they just kind of all turn and stare at us and wait to see what we're going to do. And I think that word is the most important word in all of this, and that's initiative. It seems like we tend to take it, and the European countries don't.
That's correct. And I think former President Trump had us on the right track there. And maybe the next Republican administration will continue that track. It's a big world. The wealthy countries of the West, and Europe is very much part of that, have got to step up. We've got lots of adversaries in the world, whether it's the Chinese or the Russians, and we all have to participate if we want to protect our way of life and our form of government.
And that is something that we're just going to have to deal with moving forward. We're coming up on a break here in just a minute, and I was going to go ahead and ask now if you have the time to hold on through the break so we can talk just a few more minutes about everything that's going on right now.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, we're coming up on that in just a moment. Okay. The impact, and one thing I want to talk to you about and go into a little more depth, because we don't have the time right this second, we will in a couple of minutes, is what practical impact do you think this entire situation is going to have on us as Americans moving forward in the next 6 months, a year, 2 years, whatever? So I'd love to continue discussing this with you. It's Mike Retzer, former ambassador to Tanzania and the former chairman of the Mississippi GOP. And we will continue with him on the Gallo Show on SuperTalk Mississippi next. I see on the guest line with us Mike Retzer, former chairman of the Mississippi Republican Party and the former ambassador to Tanzania. And I've always been fascinated with ambassadorships. That's got to be a really unique, life-changing experience, Mike.
Well, it's a great opportunity to serve your country and to have, as you said, a great experience. It's wonderful. It was eye-opening to see how much. One of my first questions when I was asked to serve was, okay, how much are the American people spending in a country many Americans hadn't heard of, in East Africa? And it took me 18 months to finally get to that number, and this was back in 2006. It was $400 million directly and $600 million directly and indirectly if you factor in our contribution to the World Bank and what they do, and the IMF and what they do. And this is an economy that's $3.5 billion, yet the American people were contributing $600 million. And no one in our government really knew how much we were contributing. So there's a certain blindness, and that was certainly eye-opening to me.
And I suspect that goes on a lot. We have a lot of things that we have our hands in around the world, and we don't really know how much we're spending on it. As you said just then, it took you 18 months as the ambassador to find out how much we were spending.
I just kept asking and asking, and every time I asked, it was a different answer and a greater amount. I don't think our government really wants to know.
You might have a very good point there. Something we were talking about in the last segment about the impact on the perception of America around the world as a result of what's going on in Afghanistan this week. Chinese newspaper yesterday put out an editorial explaining that the people of Taiwan better wise up because America will not help them, and even if they do, they will bail as soon as there's the first sign of trouble. I think that's just the start of those kind of comments around the world.
Well, and to be expected probably as well. And, we've pledged our support to the people of Taiwan. And they're negotiating, the changes that have occurred over there are quite remarkable because the citizens of Taiwan operate a number of factories and whatnot inside China. The standard of living in Taiwan is higher than the standard of living in China, and those businesses realized they could go back to the mainland through Shanghai and whatnot and operate businesses. So the relationship is not always what it seems, but there's no question that China wants its old country reunified, and that means Taiwan in the fold.
And this is just one more lever they can use to try to bring that all back together, I think. And a lot of people are going to be making comments. A lot of people are going to weigh in on this. Let me ask you, in your opinion, if the withdrawal had been handled more appropriately by the Biden administration, we'll put it like that, will we be getting the same comments, at least at the same level, from other countries?
Probably, in all fairness. I mean, the story of the scramble. Now, we've been talking about our withdrawal for quite a time. And it was only of late that those translators and people who aided us in country, well, probably what happened is just my guess, I don't know, is it's a bureaucracy. When people came in to get visas and to leave the country 6 months ago, 8 months ago, you were told to fill this paper out and go home, and then you were told you had to fill this other form out. So probably we made it too hard for those people to leave. And there are always people that want to leave and come to America if they can or get out. I mean, Afghanistan is an incredibly poor country, despite the fact that America has spent $1 trillion over there in the last 20 years. Still incredibly poor. There's a lot of people that want to get out, some of those people rightly, and some of those just want to get out. So our government had to differentiate between the two, probably took way too long, and so we ended up in the situation where we have people scrambling to jump on airplanes and get out.
How long is this mess going to continue before we get this cleared up and we move on to the next crisis? Because that seems to be the way of life right now. It's just one crisis transforming into another, in an almost seemingly infinite chain. How long do we have? How are the legs on this crisis?
I think it will probably wind down fairly quickly. The Taliban appear to have sealed off the airport, and so we'll have fewer or no more pictures like we've seen in the last 2 days. There'll be some, the Taliban's going to do some outrageous things. That's why they have their supporters, and they do what they do. And that may make some news stories, but I think the Afghanistan story will fade fairly quickly from the front pages.
And be immediately replaced by something else, because that's just the life we're living now.
That's the news cycle, and we have our friends in China and Russia who all would like to take advantage in one way or another.
If you had, and I ask this question of a lot of people in a lot of different situations, if you had the opportunity to give one piece of advice to the folks in the Biden administration managing this from right now, from this instant moving forward, what would you tell them?
Well, I would tell them to focus on the pandemic. Let's get us through that. Our economy seems to be recovering. Let's keep our eyes on that. As James Carville once said, it's the economy, stupid. And in politics, it always is the economy. Most Americans get up every day, and do you feel like you're better off today than you were last week or last year? And if you are, you're pretty happy. So let's go back to life as normal. Let's focus on our economy. Let's focus on the health of all our citizens. And by the way, let's everybody get vaccinated. I think that's pretty clear. And let's get on with life.
Former ambassador to Tanzania and the former Mississippi GOP chairman Mike Retzer. Have you been back to Tanzania since you're no longer ambassador? Have you just gone to visit?
Yeah, I took one visit back. Took some grandchildren. It's still. Until you've done a safari in Africa, you haven't. It should be on everybody's bucket list. It is just an incredible experience. Tanzania is a beautiful country, very peaceful, and they have things that we only see in zoos. And I wanted to show some of my grandchildren that, and so I went back for that and enjoyed it thoroughly.
Very cool. Mike, appreciate your time this morning, sir, and thank you for the insight on this story that we're all living through this week.
You bet, Dave.
Talk